No one would ever criticize the almighty and scary Slayer. Now would they?
Ooh, Slayer fans are mad at me. I'm so scared. Ooh,
Slayer fans. Slayer is weak.
I'm gonna f***ing kill you.
Hear me out.
I hate you. I hate you.
I'm gonna f***ing kill you.
I hate you.
First,
We gotta define what heavy is. Heavy comes from the guitars. Mostly. Well, pretty much.
Are you sure?
Heavy is a thick and chunky sound. And Slayer's sound is, well, be honest, it's pretty thin sounding. It doesn't have a lot of gain, it's pretty much the polar opposite. For example, I'm gonna play you a Slayer riff right off the album, and I'm gonna play you the same riff that's all beefed up, and you'll hear the difference.
I do love all those chunks of beef.
Yeah.
And stick around to the very end because I prove that having a bass does not make it beefy. When I first heard that Gary Holt was joining Slayer, I was like, what are they gonna do with the guitar sound? Because Gary's gonna pretty much overpower the band. And it's not really gonna sound like Slayer anymore. I'm willing to guess that they made him use equipment that they approve of, or somehow they nerfed his tone down to make it sound more comparable to theirs. Because if you listen to Repentlessness, that's the one that Gary played on, you'll see that there's nothing on there that sounds even close to Exodus. Here's something down-tuned from Slayer, and then comparatively a down-tuned riff from Exodus.
I want to invite you. Welcome.
We often assume that heavy equals good in our community, and that's true. Most people feel that way.
Now you're talking.
But if it's non-heavy, it does not necessarily mean that it is bad. Iron Maiden isn't heavy at all, but they are one of the best bands on this planet.
At least that's what Iron Maiden told me.
In fact, I'm gonna give Slayer some credit here. Since the beginning of metal, all the bands been in a big race to see who can be the heaviest. But Slayer has one of the most evil and diabolical sounds ever in metal. It's like a horror soundtrack. I mean, if I hear 3 notes from any Slayer song, I know it's Slayer. And how many other bands can say that? Number 2, Five Finger Death Punch is metal.
No.
As much as I don't want to give them credit, trust me, they are metal. Okay, maybe not every single part of their music is metal, but they have enough parts in there to be considered metal. Even the singer, he has a really aggressive voice. I mean, his voice alone, that could kind of be considered metal.
Under and over it. I'm under and over it.
Which contradicts what I just said in the previous clip. Heavy comes from the guitars.
Uh-oh.
And I know I'm talking just about Five Finger Death Punch right here, but it's actually not just about them. There's a lot of bands out there that people think, well, that's not metal. It's kind of like a gatekeeper thing, which I've been accused of myself. And after my next hot take, you just may think I'm a gatekeeper. Take, for example, baby metal. A lot of people don't think that's metal because of the pop lyrics and the melodies, but those guitars are really heavy. And if you actually just listen to them, that in itself is metal. Same with something like Fantomas. People call it cartoon music. I mean, I don't know about you, but I consider that metal. I mean, even the core stuff, whether it's metalcore or hardcore, like nowadays, it used to be different back then, but hardcore, you can't really tell the difference between that and metal nowadays because everyone's using the same equipment. They all got the same type of chugs and all that. I mean, like Knocked Loose, what are they? Hardcore? Are they metalcore? To me, it's just really aggressive. It sounds like metal, so I don't really see a distinction. I mean, there is a bigger distinction between, say, Megadeth and Iron Maiden than there is Knocked Loose and Pantera. In my generation, have no problem considering Iron Maiden and Megadeth both metal. Kinda strange when you think about it objectively.
Number 3.
Heartwork by Carcass is overrated. I remember first buying this album in a store.
You are old.
And I was like, meh. I mean, I didn't hate it then, and I don't hate it now, but, if I'm faced with a different album, I'm gonna pick that one instead. And then I started noticing online there's like a huge love fest for this album. The comparison of Descanting and Heartwork kind of reminds me of Amorphous. So if you take Amorphous's Tales from a Thousand Lakes, compare it to Elegy, it's a very similar comparison. And of course, Carcass did not ditch the death metal vocals, but they got rid of mostly the death metal music, except for like This Mortal Coil, which slaps, by the way. Another point for me is the production or the engineering. A lot of people go on about how good this album sounds, and it does sound really balanced, much like the Black Album does. Those guitars sound so hollow, it's like a carved out pumpkin or something. Part work is a bit too simplistic, and I don't mean like, oh, it's too easy for me to play. That's not what I mean. I mean, the structure of the songs are a bit too basic. It's like main verse, chorus, and maybe throw in one other riff. I mean, every once in a while that's fine, but mostly I get pretty bored with it. And I don't need riff salad here. What I like about the Scanthing is it does have a structure of main verse, chorus, but then it kind of goes into other riffs and it'll come back to it. It's almost like you're going on a journey. Kind of like Master Puppets. And speaking of Metallica, I think it's perfectly fine that Jason's bass is inaudible on And Justice for All.
No one invites the bass player to the party after the show.
Hey, what are you guys doing after the show? Oh, nothing, okay.
I really love the guitars on And Justice for All, except for the scooped out mid part. Now let's be real here. How many of you can actually hear that bass on those earlier thrash albums, especially when the guitars and bass are playing the exact same thing?
Actually, I can.
And I'm not talking just about Metallica, any of those earlier thrash bands, unless you're like Dee Dee Verney.
Dee Dee Verney on a bass guitar!
Or Frank Bello. And some of you say, oh yeah, I can hear the bass under the guitars.
I think you're lying.
And when you turn up the bass too loud in the mix, it will take away from the crunch of the guitars when they're palm muting. It will soften it.
Don't try to soften me up.
Unless you're using clank bass like Dee Dee Verney. Probably as many of you already know, there's a bunch of And Justice for Jason remixes and remasters out on YouTube. I'm going to look at a few of these and I'm going to compare them to the original. And like always on this channel, we're going to put them at equal volumes so we can get an objective comparison. So let's listen to the difference here. This is the original. This is the bass channels. Now see right there, you can definitely hear that bass. It's really coming through the mix, but the palm muted guitar sound really weak now. This just sounds weak. That just doesn't, that totally destroys your feeling and power that original one has. Next one here is Josh's. You can just hear it's like it just sounds like distortion in the bass. Again, it does not sound heavy at all. It sounds kind of messy. Let's go back to the original. Very clean, very tight. Go to James Mason's. Now that sounds good. That sounds as close to the original. It's got possibly a little more low in there. Compare it with the original again. And then his. The bass is a little bit it slurs the notes a bit. But that is not bad at all. I think that's the best thing that I've heard so far. And this is probably the most famous one here. I don't know his name. Sorry if I'm butchering your name. Adi, I think it is. Very famous on YouTube. No, I'm sorry. It's way too much treble. There is no low end in there. Even though there's bass, that sounds really limp. Compared to the original. I'm sorry, that one just doesn't cut it. It is not impossible to add bass to it, but you're always going to make a little bit of a compromise. And then there's a bunch of people out there who actually say the guitars are thin without the bass, and I don't know what planet you could be possibly living on, because there is no way, no how, under any circumstance that could be considered thin. Even Finn, who I love his channel.
And Justice for All needs bass guitar. It sounds too thin. Other than that,
but when he said that, I mean, it's like... Thin is like no low end. Slayer is thin. That sound, that that woofing sound, that is too much bass. That is the exact opposite of thin. And if you do think I'm onto something with this thick versus thin, I recommend you watch these videos here because I beef up the sound from these original old school albums.